Walking through history. We are the class of 2006, walking through history over leaves, puddles, and sticks, searching for info, looking for dates, weaving through stone markers beyond old iron gates. The seeds of tomorrow, we are the fruit of today, the root system of history, and so we say, we are the class of 2006, walking through history over leaves, puddles, and sticks. As third grade kids, we all say with hands down, yes, we're proud of our Apple Creek. We are proud of our town.
Hello, my name's Ed Swartz, and I'm the superintendent of Southeast Local Schools. I've been asked to host this program by the third grade at Apple Creek Elementary School. Each year, the students study the rich heritage of their roots in social studies class. In doing so, they find that the early community of Apple Creek was really called Edinburg and was founded and settled in the early 1800s by Scotch-Irish migrating into the area from Pennsylvania.
As the railroad came through the area in the middle 1800s, the businesses began to gravitate 1/2 mile south to what became known as Apple Creek Station.
Finally, the two towns combined and became incorporated into the village of Apple Creek, for which it is called today. Come join us as we take you on a journey that covers years of rich history. We hope you enjoy this video of the history of Apple Creek, of which we're all very proud.
Early Indian tribes living in Wayne County were the Delaware and the Wyandots in the 1700s. However, these were not the first Indians to live in this part of Ohio. After the Ice Age came the Paleo-Indians, followed by the Archaic. Possibly the Hopewell, where the Lost Race, or the Adena, lived in this area. Archaeologists classify this group of people as woodland peoples who built mounds and earthworks. The mounds were built for ceremonial and burial purposes. Included in these mounds were ancient bones and tools. Records speak of what was thought to be one such mound near the present Ohio Agricultural Research and Development Center. The Delaware were, for the most part, peaceful, and farmed and traded with early settlers for furs. The land where they lived had rolling hills with many hardwood trees. The soil was rich, being a mixture of clay and sand. Game was plentiful for several years after the first settlement, and there were many streams of fresh, pure water. There were 3 small Indian villages in this area. One was Beaver Hat, located at the present Worcester Cemetery. Another was Mohican Johnstown, a mile south of Jeromesville, and a third was Kilbuckstown along State Route 83 at the Holmes County line. Early settlers in East Union Township began arriving from Pennsylvania and other eastern states in the early 1800s. No sooner had these settlers arrived than the War of 1812 broke out between the Americans and the British. The British recruited the Indians, giving them rifles and encouraging them to raid the settlers. The British paid the Indians for scalps to help drive the settlers out of the Ohio Territory. However, the British were not successful in recruiting all the Indian villages.
Nathan Smith quotes from the diary of an early pioneer. It shows the fear and tension the settlers felt and reads as follows. The most dreadful scene I ever witnessed was on the night on which the alarm was given to the Apple Creek settlement west of where Edinburg now stands. Over 40 men, women, and children at about 9 o'clock started for the New Philadelphia with 2 horses and 6 guns. We made 20 miles by daybreak when a messenger was sent to inform us that it was a false alarm occasioned by a man cutting straw on a box which was heard on a lower settlement on the creek. They counted 500 strokes, which they mistook for reports of guns. The aforementioned messenger was sent to give the alarm. The march was conducted in most perfect order. If a child cried, it was taken to its mother. Young and active women carried children too small to walk. No one was permitted to speak louder than a whisper.
After the War of 1812, Indians began to leave Wayne County. The last tribe to leave Wayne County was the Wyandotte, going to reservations in Indiana and Kansas. We are here today at the Wayne County Historical Society to meet with Mr. Roger Rowe. Mr. Rowe has agreed to speak with us about some of his research on local Indian history. Mr. Rowe, I see you brought your grandson Justin Wilson with you. Share with us, if you would, some information about your background and how you became interested in Indian history.
Well, about 1973, I met with some folks from the College of Worcester and also some people from the Wayne County Historical Society, some local community members, and we decided to form a group to study the Indian remains in our area, to record, locate the mounds and village sites.
What have you found to be most interesting in your studies of Indian history?
The diversity of sites in our area. We have prehistoric sites that are very old, and we also have historic Native American sites.
What would you suggest to students who begin to study Indian history?
First of all, they should determine if they want to study the prehistoric groups or the historic groups. They should also want to learn about how these folks lived, what they ate, types of communities they lived in, something about their ceremonies if possible.
Great. What else would you share with us today?
I would like to show you the map here of the Indian trails of Wayne County. Here we have the Great Trail coming up, running through, on across, crossing here where Worcester is today. It also ran certainly within a mile of where Apple Creek is today, and depending upon the time of year, may have run right through Apple Creek itself. We also have the Great Trail, or the Cuyahoga Trail, coming down from the north, crossing the Great Trail and heading off to the villages along the Jerome Fork and beyond down to the villages at Delaware, Ohio. We have the Mohican Trail taking off here where Worcester, what becomes Worcester, taking off going to the south, leading down to the villages down along the Mohican River. We also have the Killbuck Trail coming up from the south, from near where Coshocton is today, following Killbuck Creek for the most part, and intersecting and ending here at Worcester. These trails usually followed the higher ground. They may change on occasion, depending upon the time of year, depending upon flooding, other factors. They were probably very narrow trails at that time. They were also used not only by the Native Americans, but later on they were used by the military. For example, Colonel Crawford, on his expedition against the Indians at Sandusky, came up the Killbuck Trail and camped at Crawford Springs, just on the other, or Butler Springs, excuse me, just on the other side of the Holmes County line, and cut across and camped near what became Odell's Lake. Major Robert Rogers, on his return from Detroit, passed through the Great Trail. This would have been about 1761. He camped at an Indian village that was called Mingo Cabins, followed the Great Trail across and down. Now we also have Beaver Hats Village, located within the present city limits of Worcester. This would date at about 1800. Chief Killbuck had a village just south of the Wayne-Holmes County line. That would date to about 1764.
Very interesting. We've heard that perhaps these trails might be the origin of some of our local highways.
Yes, as you can see, they very much approximate the highways as we know them today. In other words, the Great Trail would probably later become State Route 250. The Cuyahoga Trail would later become State Route 585. The Mohican Trail, State Route 3, Killbuck Trail, State Route 83. The continuation of the Cuyahoga Trail would be 95. And these trails were used not only by the Native Americans and not only by the military, but also later by the settlers who would come into these areas on these trails.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this valuable information.
Thank you.
John Chapman, or more commonly called Johnny Appleseed, was friend to both the Indians and the settlers alike. John was born on September 26, 1774, near Leominster, Massachusetts.
We know little of his boyhood except that his first years were hard. His father, who was by trade a nurseryman, left the family to fight in the Revolutionary War, and his mother and baby brother died before his second birthday.
By the time Johnny turned 6, his father had remarried and settled in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Shown here is what is thought to be his boyhood home. Johnny is described as a small, wiry man with thin lips, long dark hair, sharp black eyes, and at times a beard. His clothing was odd, and many sources say his chief article of clothing was an old coffee sack with holes cut for the head and arms. He received his ragged trousers in exchange for apple trees. He went barefooted, was unarmed, and carried little, if any, money. His first recorded appearances in Ohio was at the turn of the century, when he was seen as he drifted down the Ohio River in a canoe with apples and apple seeds from cider presses in western Pennsylvania. As he crossed the Ohio River, he came up through southeastern Ohio. There are evidences near Dexter City of family graves and a monument that was built in his memory.
In Caldwell's Atlas of Wayne County in 1873, it states, "Many of our best orchards now in Wayne County are trees which had their first growth in his forest and vine nurseries. In 1800, he came into the territory with a horse load of apple seeds, gathered from presses in western Pennsylvania. The seed were contained in leather bags, which were better suited to his journey than linen sacks, and besides, linen could not be spared for such a purpose."
He would clear a place in the forest, plant his seeds, fence in the patch, and when settlers came, would dispose of the trees for a fifpenny bit apiece, or food or old clothes. He was ahead of the settlers by about 3 years, and then the trees would be ready to transplant. Johnny is reported to have scattered seeds in East Union, Chester, and Congress townships in Wayne County as early as 1802. He planted 2 known nurseries in the Apple Creek area. One was planted on the Dave Carr farm near Carr Road and Route 30. He cleared off a half-acre of land and planted it in apple seeds. The other nursery or orchard was located near Ely Road and the creek bottom. This is thought to be where Apple Creek got its name, and also possibly the orchard that is mentioned as having belonged to Chief Beaver Hat.
The Indians treated Johnny with much respect and kindness. He was regarded by them as a great medicine man, probably because he brought them medicinal herbs such as catnip and pennyroyal. He was welcomed by the settlers and was at first known as Appleseed John. They loved and appreciated him for his goodness, kindness, and unselfish ways. He had a great love for children and was advanced in the humane treatment of animals in his day. His mission in life went further than providing pioneers with apple trees. He also shared his love of the Bible and gave out tracts and books about his faith from the teachings of Emil Swedenborg.
He spent part of his time with his half-sister who lived near Mansfield. There are stories of his helping to warn settlers in the area of Indian attacks. A monument has been erected there in his memory. By 1838, Johnny had continued to move west to northeastern Indiana. When Johnny passed 70 years of age, it was more difficult for him to keep up with his work. It was said that while on a long trip into the wilderness to repair damage in a distant orchard, he became ill while trudging through a snowstorm near Fort Wayne. He sought out shelter in a settler's cabin and died a few days later. His headstone reads, Johnny Appleseed, John Chapman. He lived for others. A story about our community would not have been complete without the story of Johnny Chapman. We remember him each year with our own Johnny Appleseed Days. Johnny found a way to live at peace with both settlers and Indians alike while our nation was in conflict and experiencing the tension of our battle for freedom. In 1792, the British gave up land to the United States, including what is now Ohio. This new region was called the Northwest Territory and was governed by the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The law stated that not more than 5 nor fewer than 3 states were to be formed from the region, and statehood was promised to any district that had 60,000 people living there. However, Soon after the first settlements were established in the Northwest Territory, the Indians formed a confederation for the purpose of destroying the towns in present-day Ohio and driving out the settlers. After 2 unsuccessful expeditions against the Indians, General George Washington chose General Anthony Wayne to lead the 3rd expedition. Wayne was chosen because he had bravely led the American forces against the British in the American Revolution. General Wayne proved to be a good choice. He drilled his army for 6 months before approaching the Indians in battle. His victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794 forever broke the power of the Indians in what is now Ohio. The Indians gave up nearly 2/3 of their land in 1795 and signed what was known as the Greenville Treaty. This descriptive sketch shows the first section of the treaty with the Wyandotte chiefs drawing their tribal totem pole next to their name. A much larger Wayne County was established by General Arthur St. Clair, governor of the Northwest Territory, on August 15, 1796. It includes parts of what is now Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and all of Michigan. On March 1, 1803, Ohio became the first state formed from the Northwest Territory and the 17th state in the Union. In 1812, the Ohio General Assembly organized the present Wayne County, Ohio, named after General Anthony Wayne. In 1805, an Indian treaty made it possible for the government to sell land west of the Tuscarawas River and north of the Greenville Treaty Line as shown here. Soon, the present Wayne County was open for settlement. First, the land had to be surveyed. A team of surveyors was hired, including William Henry, Joseph H. Lorwell, and John Beaver. Townships were divided into 36 sections, each 1 mile square, which had 640 acres each. Shown here is an example. In 1808, the surveying was completed and the United States Land Office was opened in Canton, Ohio. Land cost $2 an acre, and no one could buy less than 160 acres. Thus, the first purchases were made. 1/4 of the money was to be paid in cash, with the balance paid in 3 equal installments. Patents could be assigned to someone else, who then completed the purchase. An example of a patent deed issued by the Land Office is shown here. It belonged to Andrew Moore. East Union Township in Wayne County was surveyed by J.H. Lorwell in 1806. During this early period, settlers began to arrive in different parts of the township. The township was named by one of the early settlers, Simon Cheffin, who came to the area in the spring of 1813 from Union, Maine. The township was formed on September 5, 1814. Edinburg in East Union Township was laid out by 2 early settlers by the names of William Thomas and John Cheney in 1832. John Cheney was a millwright by trade and built 6 grist mills and 9 sawmills in Wayne County between 1814 and 1827. Cheney is also mentioned as having received visits from old Johnny Appleseed.
The town was plotted on a stream known as Apple Creek, which crosses Route 250.
Edinburg gradually grew toward the east. On this map of 1856, we see a thriving town with businesses like a woolen mill, a foundry, a tannery, and several stores. The tannery was used to change rawhides into leather. Land records for the tannery dating back to 1858 were recently found by Mary Shadburn, the present owner of the property. The deed record shows the tannery was still in operation as late as 1901. In 1832, a grist mill, which was used to grind the farmer's grain, had been built in Bonnewitt's Bottom, near the creek west of Edinburg. This water-powered mill was later torn down. The timbers from the mill were carried into the town and used to build the Studer Brothers flour mill. Nearby, there was a woolen mill, like this mill we're about to tour, which operates in Holmes County. It was built about the same time Edinburg officially began. Let's turn our attention to the Rastetter woolen mill for a glimpse into the past.
I'd like to welcome you to the Rastetter woolen mill. It's been here in Holmes County since the 1840s. Hasn't been in this location for that long. It's been here for about 50 years. It used to be located about 4 or 5 miles east of here along the Doughty Creek in an area called the Doughty Valley. And the Doughty Valley was a milling community where there was a grist mill, a sawmill, and the original woolen mill. The woolen mill has gone through 5 generations of one family, and my wife and I are now the owners of part of a new generation. We'd also like to start to tell you a little bit about the woolen mill. We buy our wool directly from the farmers. They come in here, we pay the going rate for wool by the pound. We do about 2 bushels a basket a day. That's about all we can handle right now. And we do it right back here in this cast iron brick line gas-fired burner. It takes about 3 hours at 160 degrees for us to do a batch of wool. We wash it with our famous plunger, and then we rinse it here with the use of our pitchfork. That seems to be the best way to move the wool from one process to another. After we've washed it and we've drained it, we then take over here and we rinse it in our rinse tub. Now, one of the things that we use, unique to a lot of places, is we use rainwater. And we use rainwater because it's much softer and it doesn't suds up as much, and it's a whole lot easier for us to rinse the suds out again when we use the rainwater. So we are standing on, while I'm standing here, I'm standing on about a 6,000-gallon cistern that we save the rainwater to wash our wool with. We then take the wool out of the rinse tub, take it and put it into feed sacks, and outside of this wall on the building here, we have 2 rows of steel pegs. And we hang our wool out there on steel pegs to let it drip dry as best we can. Takes a little longer now that we're here in the winter time of the year. After it's drip dried the most we can, we then take it to the attic of this building where we have wire mesh. And during the summertime it's very hot up there, and it still takes about 1 week for the wool fleece to completely dry after we've washed it. After it's been completely dry, we bring it back downstairs here to the main floor, and we take it into the next room where we're going to head next. We're in the carding room now here at the woolen mill. Remember I told you that we had to bring the wool back down from upstairs in the attic. We bring it back down here, and it needs to have what we call picking done to it. And the picking not only begins to loosen up the fiber, but it also begins to pull more of the dirt out of it. You got to remember, we're talking a farm animal here, and so it's been laying in the field, it's been laying in a stall and in mud, and so even though we've washed it, there's a lot of straw and other pieces that need to be picked out of there yet. So we bring it down to our first piece of equipment, which is our picking machine. And remember I told you that this equipment had all been run off of a single water wheel at one time. So therefore, all of it is done on a pulley system, a single pulley system, which is located here. The pulley system has all kinds of wheels on it. And these wheels, whenever we need a power source, we just take and we have a leather strap that goes around the large wheel, and then we have it down to our piece of equipment. It's not like what we do today, and that is when we need an electric motor, we just plug in a light or we plug in a motor. Here they only had one power source, and so we still continue to use the pulley system here. This is our picking machine, and it basically is there to clean. And we feed the wool in from this side. It's one of those pieces of equipment that you have to be extremely careful because it has many gears and fine teeth and very, very large teeth. And this wheel here rotates at a very, very rapid pace. The wool goes through, gets picked apart, gets blown over into that corner, and we run it through the picking machine twice. Then, after it's been picked twice, we then head over into our pride and joy, and that's our carding machine. After we're done picking off the picking machine, we get the wool out of the corner of this room where it has been run through the picking machine twice, and we begin to run it through our carding machine. Now our carding machine is kind of our pride and joy here at Rastetter Woolen Mill. It was built during the Civil War. It was built during 1862. It is the oldest carding machine in continual use here in the United States. And so we really baby this machine quite a bit. We bring that picked wool and we put it back here on a conveyor belt. And the conveyor belt begins to feed the wool fiber into the carding machine. The carding machine is basically nothing but a series of rollers with fine wire fingers. And all it does is begin to straighten the wool fiber out so that when it finally gets to the last drum on this machine, it begins to accumulate. And that's where we get our wool bats from. As the wool fibers continue to go through the rollers, you can see the wool here on here. It is being straightened out. The fibers are being straightened out by the wires on these drums and on these wheels. We finally get down to this last large drum. This too is covered with fine wires, but we have a bar right across here, and this bar begins to separate the wool fiber from this wheel, and it wants to accumulate on this drum. With the help of static electricity, we get the wool fiber to come off of the last wire drum onto this drum to accumulate. And we realize that when we get about about 1 inch thickness here of wool on the drum, that we've got about enough wool for one of our comfort bats. We have to be really careful, and I forgot to mention this before, that as we had washed our wool, we had to wash the lanolin out. And lanolin is a natural lubricant on the wool. But when we come to a machine like this, that natural lubricant does nothing but gum up our machine. So we have to be real careful that when we wash our wool, that we wash all of the lanolin out so that our machine doesn't gum up. Otherwise, the whole process, the whole wheels wouldn't turn anymore. After we've gotten our 1 inch of wool here on this last wheel, we stop the wheel, we grab our large scissors, and we cut straight across. We peel that wool off, and that's what we call one wool bat. Here at Rastetter Woolen Mill, 99% of our wool that we process here gets used in wool comforts. We make wool comforts. We don't make cloth and we don't make yarn here. We just use it and we stick it in cheesecloth for comforters for the winter time.
Let's take a look at some of our early pioneers who gave up so much to start a new life in this area. According to research by Richard Smith, one of our local historians, the first settlers in East Union Township were Oliver Day, Jonathan Mansfield, and Vesta Frary, who came from Vermont in 1809. Settling in Edinburg in 1812 was Judge Smith Orr, who immigrated from Northern Ireland in 1801. The first election was held at his house in Edinburg. He later built this home in 1854 when he settled and founded what is now Orrville. Another pioneer family that came to this township in 1812 was Frederick Brown, a native of Pennsylvania. He visited the area first with his son John Jay and returned to settle here. This was the first family name of Brown to establish itself in Wayne County. John married Sarah Mercer in 1820 at age 26. In 1850, he moved with his wife and family to Indiana and settled in Winona Lake. Here he pioneered and helped to found this little Christian community, which was later home to the well-known evangelist Billy Sunday. John returned to the area in 1859 and died at age 67. Of special interest is the Casper Langle family. Casper settled in the township in 1814 and built a brick house in Edinburg in 1816, which was the first hotel between Worcester and New Philadelphia. Joshua Jameson from the state of Delaware settled in the area in 1818. He and his wife Rebecca had 11 children, 2 of them being Alex and Isaac, who later owned and operated a store in Edinburg. The first Amish settler was Jacob Yoder, who came to East Union Township in 1817. Today, Wayne and Holmes counties are home to the largest Amish settlement in the United States. Another pioneer family was John and Hannah Moore from Pennsylvania, who emigrated to East Union Township in 1814. They eventually settled on land owned by John's father, Andrew Moore, who is mentioned in the land deed. The early pioneers that left New England to settle in our area brought with them a system of values that served them well. Both religion and education were important to them. The Great Northwest Ordinance of 1787 stated, "Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged."
The first schools were subscription schools, meaning that they were paid for by the parents. Groups of citizens joined together to build a school and hire a teacher, charging each pupil a set fee. The master, as he was referred to, boarded in the homes of the students. The school term usually lasted the 3 winter months, and students were taught the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic.
The Northwest Ordinance gave land for the use of schools to each township in Ohio. 1 square mile, or 1/36th of each township, was set aside for public schools. As you can see, East Union Township and surrounding townships all set aside Section 16, which was designated by Congress. The land was leased and then sold. In 1821, a law was passed for public tax funds to be used for schools. It also divided townships into school districts of 4 sections each, or 9 in each township. Here we see East Union Township school districts. The schoolhouse was usually primitive. It was built of logs with greased paper windows, a latch-string door, and the floor of clay. The seats for the pupil were benches of heavy timber having no backs. Boards arranged in a slope provided desks. At one end of the building, there was a fireplace.
Soon after Edinburg was founded in 1832, the village built its first school. It stood here at the end of Finley Street on the east side. The school was here until 1874.
Let's turn our attention briefly to the present and visit with Mr. Richard Smith. Mr. Smith is a former principal in the Southeast local schools whose interest in research in local history has impacted so many. Mr. Smith, what part do you believe our local history plays in education?
I think that studying local history, we learn that the schools are a very important part of, and they always have been. One of the biggest reasons for our progress has been our original pioneers. Always, schools, the first thing they made after they got a block house, the Indians didn't get them. They always had a school. And of course, another one along with that is the churches. In the same way, they were very important in improving the morality of the people and the richness of their existence, the spirituality. They always looked after that. And so, to be educated, I think you have to understand that kind of how we got to where we are now. And the schools and the churches. Another thing I would add with that would be the newspapers. They have helped keep people informed about the decisions to be made and the election of the officials.
Mr. Smith, how do you feel your writing of history has benefited other people?
Well, mainly in preserving the records and of the activities and what people were interested in, what they did, the problems they had, and their attempt to solve them. The activities and events that are not written down are lost in a very short time. I'm in genealogy so much, and there are many people who they just don't know who their grandparents are, for example. And now with some of the things that we have done in writing these local history papers and things, they can find out much about things like, and answer questions like that.
What are some of the ways that the students can begin studying and researching our local history?
Ask your parents and your grandparents, and if any older people in your community, that's the place to begin. And of course, most of these are in the cemeteries are an important part of your research. In genealogy, you can find where your ancestors are buried. Tax list, census, and wills. Even today, your parents and others should have wills which tell in there all the people that inherit something that you want to give it to. I went down to Steubenville one time when I got started on this, and I went in this courthouse, and this Philip Smith that we're talking about died in 1814, and I wasn't in there 5 minutes until I had a copy of his will with all the children listed in it.
We certainly appreciate your comments. I know that our students will gain much by the studies you've done in the past, and I know that it is important to their future. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Okay.
It is believed that Edinburg got its name from the many Scotch-Irish settlers that came to the area. Since Edinburg was the capital of Scotland, it is logical to suppose the settlement would bear the name from the settlers' motherland. Presbyterianism began in 1550 in Scotland when John Knox left the Catholic Church during the Reformation movement. In the 1600s, England took over Ireland and broke up the Irish nobility. The English encouraged the Scots to settle in Northern Ireland. In the 1700s, life became difficult under British rule. 200,000 Scotch-Irish, or Scots coming from Ireland, came to the colonies. After the War of 1812, many Scotch-Irish Presbyterians who were living in Pennsylvania came to East Union Township and purchased land. In the fall of 1815, the first church in Edinburg had been organized by Reverend James Adams and Reverend Thomas Hughes. Reverend Hughes had also established the Edinburg Academy in western Pennsylvania. Among the well-known men who graduated from the academy was William McGuffey, author of the McGuffey Reader, and John Brown, the well-known abolitionist. Services at the Presbyterian Church of Edinburg were first held in an old grist mill on the west side of the creek. Later, this mill was turned into a woolen mill. The first church building was erected in the summer of 1817. It was a log building 40 feet by 30 feet. It was located on the southwest corner of a 3-acre plot of ground donated by John Cheney and Casper Langle families. However, the first building was used only a short time. By 1823, a new, larger brick church was built on the southeast corner of the lot. It was located approximately where the Dale James Ford car dealership now stands. By 1841, the brick church became unsafe, and the congregation decided it was necessary to build again. By 1843, the congregation had purchased 1 acre of land for $100 on the north side of the graveyard. This is a picture of the wood frame church building, which was 50 feet wide by 80 feet long. It cost $2,900. The Edinburg Academy was built in 1843 across the road from the new church. The Academy was not controlled by the Edinburg Presbyterian Church, even though a majority of the stockholders were Presbyterian. The school was in session for 2 terms of 5 months each. Some of the subjects taught were algebra, geometry, chemistry, Latin, and Greek. By 1871, the Academy had closed and was sold to the church for a parsonage.
Ella Manson, who was the postmaster in Apple Creek for many years, nominated the Edinburg Academy as a historical landmark to the Wayne County Historical Society. My in-laws presented this plaque to my husband Bob for his birthday in 1976. The plaque has been hanging with pride since then. Hi, welcome to our home. Please come inside. I'm glad you came to visit.
Thank you. The present owners are the Florys. Let's step inside and meet Mrs. Flory.
What was it about this house that made you want to move?
Well, come on, let's just take a look around and I'll show you. In 1959, my husband's parents, Virgil and Martha Flory, had a real interest in purchasing this home. They were taken in by its beautiful, spacious, 17-acre setting on the side of a hill. Their desire for a larger home made them decide to buy it. It was a real fixer-upper. Virgil and Bob, being general contractors, took this on as a serious project. In July of 1971, we moved here, and we've lived here for the past 25 years. It has been a great place to raise our family, with plenty of room for children and animals to run.
Since this house is over 150 years old, are there any special features which you like?
Even though some of the interior walls have been changed, the open stairway has been restored to its original cherry finish. This has to be my favorite feature of the house, especially at Christmas time. I also like the high ceilings, wide woodwork, and the big windows in the large rooms.
What changes have been made that you're aware of?
Well, when the Florys purchased the home, they did all of the usual remodeling changes, like replastering the walls, rewiring, and plumbing. Many long hours of work in the evening and on weekends were put into restoring this home. A few walls were changed to make closets and bathrooms. The floors were stripped and hardwood flooring was put down. Carpeting was then laid over it in the living room and the dining room. They did their own painting, papering, sanding, and decorating. Several years ago, our daughter Amber and I decided to take up the old carpeting in the dining room and paint the floor. We stenciled it to make it look like an old floor again. The stairway used to be open on the second floor as well as on the first floor. The spindles from this were found up in the attic. Originally, in the entranceway, there was a hallway here dividing the stairway and a room over here. There was a wall right here with French doors. Over the years, someone made it into a larger room, taking out the wall. Bob has recently put down this hardwood floor to make the separation again. Our house has 8 large rooms and 2 bathrooms. At one time, the Academy had 14 classrooms in this same space. It's hard to imagine having rooms that small. There was a little closed-in porch back here when the Florys moved in. Now in this space is a 700-square-foot family room that the Florys added on back in the late 60s.
Can you still see old parts of the building?
The windows of the house are still the originals. If you look closely, you can see tiny bubbles visible in the glass. Glass was originally made that way using a rolled process, which also gave it that wavy look. It's difficult to replace these windows with this same type of glass if they are to get broken. Here you can see that the glass is cut in an arch shape. The trim on the outside of the house is decorative. In the basement, you can really tell that this house was built nearly 155 years ago because the beams are logs with all the bark remaining on them. The main supports are made of hand-hewn beams. That means they weren't cut with modern saws, all neat and trim like the beams are cut today. The walls of the basement are built with large sandstone. They are not the easiest walls to keep clean, but they certainly provide a solid foundation. Recently, Bob installed central air and a new gas furnace. When he tried to cut through the floor to put in new registers, he struggled to get through the many layers of wood that made up the floors and walls. I would venture to say that this house was built to last a long time. We've all grown quite fond of the Edinburg Academy and its past. Our children, Amber, Chad, and Erica, all have good memories of growing up here. It's really exciting to live in a place with so much history, and we hope to keep it in the Flory family for many generations to come.
The Methodist Church was brought to the area by other early settlers. The roots of the Methodist Church started in England in 1729 by John Wesley. The person sent to America as a missionary was Francis Asbury in 1770. After the Revolutionary War, ministers and circuit riders helped spread the faith. They moved westward with the pioneers along the frontier. After the War of 1812, the Edinburg area opened up to settlers. By 1820, there were about 1/2 Methodist families that had located here. In 1835, the Methodists bought a house next to the bridge on the north side of the road. The land was purchased from John Cheney. In 1844, the church had 20 members, which was enough to form a society and have its own circuit preacher.
Thank you for joining us on this walk through history of our community. We've enjoyed having you with us as we've taken a look at our roots. We hope that this is the beginning of a study of the past for you.
We're the best in the city. We all say Apple Creek. Kids are smart and do their part. We're loyal to you every day. Every heart beats true. Watch out for the caterpillar. Yeah.